In the early hours of December the 23rd, 1989, a pair of police officers stumbled across the scene of a brutal double murder in a public car park located within London's Epping Forest. The victims were a seemingly normal couple in their 30s that had been dating for several years. It was later revealed the male victim may have had ties to criminal activity. 6 months later, a second murder scene was discovered just 2 miles away. The victim on this occasion was identified as a wealthy North London woman who was found to be a high-end escort, with clients that included prominent judges and TV personalities. The subsequent investigations revealed parallels between both crimes. Details led authorities and the media to speculate as to whether the murders were contract killings, possibly carried out by professional hitmen with connections to some of London's most notorious and feared crime syndicates. But what were the motives behind these killings? And, in both cases, have investigators allowed those responsible to slip through their grasp and evade justice? Welcome to the Crime Portal. These are the cases of Patricia Lee Parsons, Terry Gooderham, and Maxine Arnold. Epping Forest is an ancient woodland straddling Greater London and Essex, covering approximately 2,400 hectares, making it the largest forest in London. Known for its rich biodiversity, it is home to hundreds of wildlife species and features diverse habitats, including grasslands, ancient trees, and over 100 ponds and lakes. The forest has a long history, once serving as a royal hunting ground, and is now a popular destination for recreation, nature walks, and cultural events. At around 12:45 p.m. on the morning of Sunday the 24th of June 1990, a group of ramblers were walking in the village of Upshur, which is located in the Epping Forest district between the small towns of Waltham Abbey and Epping. As they strolled down the sparsely populated Long Street, they noticed a rather peculiar sight. A small white hatchback was parked under a tree on a grassy field known as Copt Hall Green, and decided to take a closer look. One member of the group peered through the window of the vehicle and was met with the shocking sight of a deceased woman slumped over the driver's seat with severe head injuries. She looked as if she was ready for a night on the town, with heavily made up eyes and wearing a mauve-coloured party dress. Another member of the group rushed to a nearby farm to alert authorities, and it wasn't long before police from the town of Edmonton descended on the scene, led by Detective Superintendent Doug Harvey. It didn't take long for investigators to identify the victim as the owner of the white 1985 C registration VW Golf GTI Cabriolet within which she was found, Patricia Lee Parsons. Patricia was known as Lee to those closest to her, and it seems as if this was her preferred name. For that reason, I will be referring to her as Lee for this episode. Lee's age at the time of her murder is variably given as 42 or 43 years old. Sadly, information about Lee's life is somewhat sparse. In the 4 years prior to her death, Lee lived in a house on Firs Avenue in Frey and Barnet, which is located in North London, just over 16 miles southwest of the spot she was found dead. Lee was known by neighbours as a friendly person who took great pride in her garden. According to some reports, Lee was divorced, and it's also noted that she was reasonably wealthy. The house in which she lived is reported to have been worth around £500,000 in 1990. However, given the property was sold for less than that in the early 2020s, I'm not sure how accurate that number is. Lee was also the owner of another 2 properties in London. For the 12 years leading up to her murder, Lee worked 3 days per week as a masseuse at the now defunct New Experience Sauna in Camden Town, which was located on Eversholt Street, roughly half a mile from King's Cross Station. According to some reports, Lee ran the establishment and was known to her clients by the name Debbie. But Lee also had another source of income. For several years, she had worked as a high-end escort, providing sexual services to men. A friend of Lee's would later state, quote, "Lee was strikingly attractive. She loved her work and she saw herself as a social worker on behalf of lonely men. She dressed to please them and relieved their fantasies." Although Lee's escorting was not initially reported by newspapers, the police were aware of this detail early on. For roughly 2 years leading up to her untimely death, Lee had been in a relationship with a man named Ozzy Hussain. It doesn't appear to be public knowledge as to whether or not he was aware of Lee's escorting. In the 12 months prior, Lee had loaned Ozzy the money to open a Turkish restaurant. The establishment was affectionately named Leo's, an amalgamation of the couple's names. It opened at the start of 1990 and was located at the Stowe Shopping Centre in Harlow, Essex, roughly 25 miles northeast of Lee's home. At the time of recording, the unit is now a Chinese food restaurant by the name of Golden Dragon. Ozzy was key in helping to piece together a timeline of Lee's movements on the day before her body was found. At around midday, the pair left Lee's house in her white Golf GTI and made their way to the restaurant to prepare for a private function taking place that evening. At around 3:30 p.m, Lee departed the restaurant and went home. It was her intention to return to the restaurant later to help out, and she wanted to get ready. She had also planned to stop off at a garden centre on her way home. Upon returning to Firs Avenue, Lee prepared herself for the evening ahead and took a call from Ozzy at around 6 p.m. She confirmed to her boyfriend that she had collected the flowers she had planned to pick up from the garden centre, and Ozzy asked what time she was expecting to be back at the restaurant, confirming the event was due to begin at 7:30. She told Ozzy that she was still getting ready but would be there on time. A neighbour later came forward to say they'd seen Lee depart in her car at 7:30 p.m. Roughly 30 minutes later, Lee returned to her house. Nobody knows where she was during that time. Concerned, Ozzy once again phoned the house at around 8 p.m, and Lee answered. He questioned why Lee was running late, to which she gave a seemingly strange response. Lee informed Ozzy that she had something to tell him, but didn't want to give the news over the phone. He responded by asking her if it was good news or bad. She insisted it was good news, but didn't elaborate any further. Sadly, Ozzy would never find out what Lee had to tell him, as this would be the last time the pair ever spoke. Ozzy would later state that it sounded like Lee had been asleep, which of course couldn't be true, as she had only just returned home. Lee's next-door neighbour came forward to assist police in establishing her next movements. The neighbour was watching the 1990 World Cup Last 16 football match between Czechoslovakia and Costa Rica. At around 8:30 p.m, he heard a loud argument taking place inside Lee's home. After turning the volume down on his TV, he claims to have heard a man shouting at Lee. This concerned the neighbour, who proceeded to go outside his house and attempt to look through Lee's kitchen window. He apparently saw a light on, but couldn't see or hear anyone inside. After heading back inside, the neighbour heard Lee's front door bang shut. He looked out of his front window and saw Lee getting into the passenger seat of her car of her own accord. She was accompanied by a man who entered the driver's side of the vehicle. The neighbour did not recognise this man, and the best description he could give was that the individual was a white man with fair hair. Lee's car was then driven away by the man. This incident occurred at around 9 p.m. Soon after, Ozzy called Lee's house but was met with her answering machine. Interestingly, there are no reports of another car being seen on Firs Avenue, and the other neighbour that saw Lee return home at around 8 p.m. made no mention of a man accompanying Lee. This of course raises the question, how did this individual travel to Lee's house? 3 individuals were sought for questioning by police as a result of other witnesses coming forward. At 1:30 p.m. on the day Lee was last seen, a woman local to the Upshur area was driving south along Fernhall Lane towards Crown Hill, which is approximately a quarter of a mile from the location Lee would be found the next morning. This witness claims to have seen 2 men parked on opposite sides of the road that appeared to be talking to one another. The witness found this odd. She didn't recognise the men as local, and they didn't appear to be preparing for the usual activities that people visited the area for, such as walking their dogs. At around 6 p.m, the witness was returning home from their shopping trip and noticed the same men and their cars had not moved. They were stood outside their vehicles, still conversing. One of these individuals is said to have had a large metallic green car. He was black with light skin, in his mid-30s and around 6 feet tall. He had a slim build with short, neatly cut, slicked back hair and sported a mustache. He was wearing a yellow sweatshirt. The other individual was stood next to what's described as a large red car. His description is somewhat limited. A white man wearing black tracksuit bottoms with a red stripe along the seam. While it of course cannot be verified as to whether these two men remained in the spot for the entirety of the afternoon and early evening between the times they were spotted by the witness, the woman who saw them understandably found it odd. The third individual police wanted to speak with was spotted by one of Lee's neighbours on Firs Avenue. At around 5 p.m. on the day Lee was last seen, the neighbour remembered seeing a large black car slowly driven towards Lee's house and onto her drive. The neighbour noted that Lee's car was on the driveway, indicating that she was home. The car stood out to the witness, who described it as being too nice to be a minicab, with a distinctive V-shaped aerial. Some reports claimed the vehicle was a limousine. The driver reportedly stopped on Lee's drive, gave a nod towards her house, and then drove out of the cul-de-sac. This driver is described only as a black man in his 30s, smartly dressed and clean-shaven. It does not appear that this individual, nor the two men spotted close to the crime scene in the red and green cars, were ever traced. Police also appealed for potential witnesses to come forward that had attended a wedding reception which took place at Upsher's Village Hall the night Lee was last seen, in addition to appealing for an elderly couple seen parked in a V registration Mini on the Sunday morning close to the crime scene. There are no reports suggesting anything of significance came from these appeals. The police investigation continued in the weeks following the discovery of Lee's body, and more information about her cause of death was revealed to the public. It was confirmed that Lee had not been sexually assaulted prior to her killing, but she had sustained a brutal beating. She had 3 deep puncture wounds to the head, which ultimately ended her life. Authorities confirmed they were almost certain the injuries had been caused by a crossbow, although no crossbow bolts were reported to have been recovered by investigators. In accordance with the 1987 Crossbow Act, it is legal for persons over the age of 18 to purchase and own a crossbow in the UK, although there are of course strict rules surrounding their ownership, such as it being illegal to use them for hunting live animals. Crossbow-related deaths are rare in the UK, with the BBC reporting in 2024 that there were fewer than 10 deaths between 2011 and 2021. Investigators would also reveal they were working on the assumption that Lee had been killed at or near to the location her body was discovered. Within weeks of the murder taking place, investigators were struggling to uncover new lines of inquiry, and so in December of 1990, the decision was made to feature the case on the TV programme Crime Watch. The episode featured a lengthy reconstruction of Lee's confirmed movements on the day she was last seen, in addition to the 2 men seen talking outside their cars near to the crime scene, and finally, the man seen pulling onto Lee's driveway in a black vehicle. DS Doug Harvey appeared on the programme and confirmed that it was his belief Lee's murder was premeditated and that she was lured from her home by the killer. He also confirmed that he and his team were yet to establish a motive for the crime. He appealed for information from anybody that knew Lee or knew of her pseudonym of Debbie. The segment concluded with a brief snippet of home video footage showing Lee enjoying herself at the restaurant she owned with her boyfriend Ozzy, seen here in a belly dancer's outfit. According to the Harlow Star newspaper, published on the 13th of September 1990, the programme generated nearly 100 calls within a week of its airing, with many of the callers identifying crossbow owners in the Harlow area. Unfortunately, no significant information appears to have come to light, and by the end of 1990, the case quickly went cold. Lee's murder saw very little media coverage for over a decade, until it was picked up by the Met's Cold Case Review team in 2003. Investigators are said to have begun taking DNA samples from family members and friends of Lee, which implies that some sort of DNA evidence was in existence. According to an article released in The Guardian, the Cold Case Review, quote, failed to make a breakthrough using the latest DNA technology. A few years later, in early 2007, a team of 6 officers interviewed around 50 people as part of the ongoing case review and received what they described as crucial information, which gave rise to several lines of inquiry. Detective Inspector Bob Mahoney, who by this time was leading the investigation, told The Guardian, quote, "This is one of the most fascinating cases I have ever worked on. One theory was that the answer to who killed Patricia Parsons and why would be found in her diary. It was rumoured to have contained the details of a top judge, TV presenters, barristers and accountants. However, it could not be found. The diary in question is reported to have contained the names of around 200 of Lee's clients and has never been recovered." The article in which D.I. Mahoney was quoted concludes by stating, "Police are expected to make an arrest sometime in the next 2 weeks." And, sure enough, 17 years after Lee's murder, the first, and at the time of recording, only arrest in the case was made. A 58-year-old man named Colin Rosenheim was detained at his local health centre in Streatham, South London. Police reportedly quizzed him for 5 hours over whether he carried out the killing with another unnamed man, but he refused to answer any questions and was bailed until the following month. Mr. Rosenheim told reporters for the Sunday Mirror newspaper, quote, "I have done absolutely nothing wrong. I am completely innocent and told the police that, for reasons that were never made public, the case against the 58-year-old was not pursued further and the charges against him were dropped. No further information surrounding the reasoning for this arrest appears to have been revealed. Since 2007, there have been no further updates in the investigation, and the murder of Lee Parsons has sadly received no media coverage. As discussed previously, back in 1990, the original lead investigator, DS Doug Harvey, was of the opinion that Lee's murder was pre-planned. It's hard to disagree, and it seems impossible that a trio of crossbow bolts to the head could have been a crime of passion, or a reactive, spur-of-the-moment decision on the killer's part. DS Harvey also discussed the lack of a clear motive for Lee's murder, which has naturally led to a number of theories being proposed by both the media and general public. These theories all revolve around Lee's work as an escort. Was Lee about to expose some of the so-called high-profile clients that are believed to have been listed in her missing notebook? Could someone not risk potential backlash from this and decided to take action? Or maybe they feared being blackmailed? Could one of Lee's clients have become too attached and decided to take her life after coming to the realization that he would never have her all to himself? Perhaps through her line of work, Lee had been made aware of information she was not supposed to have known, and someone felt she needed to be silenced. Was Lee's murder somehow connected to the news she refused to share with her boyfriend Ozzy during their last ever phone call? One theory discussed by authorities and media outlets in the years following the murder could align with several of the potential motives put forward. Was Lee's murder a contract killing, possibly carried out by members of London's criminal underworld? This theory was developed as Lee's murder took place amidst a spate of similar killings across London, all of which bore the hallmarks of being carried out by a hired hitman. One such incident that was frequently discussed as possibly being connected to Lee's killing from the start was the brutal double murder of a couple that were found shot to death just 2 miles from the location Lee was found dead. Both crimes took place within a 6-month period. On December the 23rd, 1989, 39-year-old accountant and pub stocktaker Terry Gooderham, along with his girlfriend of 7 years, Maxine Arnold, an insurance executive whose age is variably given as 31 and 32, were found shot to death in Terry's Mercedes E190 saloon. The vehicle was found in a car park on Lodge Road, approximately 20 minutes from Maxine's flat in northeast London, and roughly 2 miles from the scene where Lee Parsons would be found dead 6 months later. On the evening of December the 22nd, the couple were planning to meet with Maxine's mother, Violet, at a nearby pub named the Essex Arms for a drink, but they never arrived. It's unclear why they would have gone to Epping Forest, as they had not told anyone of such plans, and were believed to be unfamiliar with the area. Violet visited the flat later that evening, noting signs that the couple had left suddenly. Their dinner was half eaten, the gas fire was still on, and the Christmas tree lights remained lit. Maxine's handbag and Terry's wallet were also left behind. A colleague of Maxine's had phoned the flat at around 6:45 p.m. and Maxine answered. She sounded hurried and said that she needed to take Terry somewhere, suggesting the couple left shortly afterward. Police initially suspected they had arranged to meet someone in or near Epping Forest, but later theorised they had been abducted and taken there against their will. Witnesses later reported seeing a Mercedes being driven erratically along Epping Road, which joins Lodge Road, where the car would go on to be found. It was described as flashing its lights as though trying to draw attention to passing motorists. One witness described seeing a man in the back seat, while another saw a similar vehicle being driven close to the Wake Arms roundabout between 7:15 and 7:45 p.m, just a few hundred metres from the crime scene. The bodies were discovered at around 4 a.m. by a police patrol passing through the area. The engine of Terry's car was still running. According to some reports, Mr. Gooderham was in the driver's seat and Miss Arnold was in the passenger seat. According to other reports, the couple were found outside the car. Both victims had been shot execution style in the back of the head with a 12-bore double-barreled shotgun, fired by someone sitting in the seat behind them. Maxine had defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that she tried to shield herself, leading investigators to surmise that Terry was shot first. During the investigation, it was discovered that Terry had been seeing another woman, but this was determined to be unrelated to the murders. Neither Terry or Maxine were known to have any enemies. Rumours quickly emerged that the murders were tied to drug dealings or money laundering, but police found no evidence that either Terry or Maxine was involved in any criminal activity. Nevertheless, the killings bore the hallmarks of a professional hit. Following the murder of Patricia Lee Parsons 6 months later, detectives working on the case discussed the possibility of a connection with the murders of Terry and Maxine, given the close proximity of the crimes, the fact all three victims had been lured from their homes, and the fact both crimes seemed to be execution-style killings, though no direct evidence linked the two incidents. By January 1992, after 18 months of investigation, police publicly stated that the murders of Terry Gooderham, Maxine Arnold, and Lee Parsons were likely carried out by professional hitmen, although it was unclear if the same person was responsible. An article was published on the 5th of January 1992 in the Sunday Mirror, in which Chief Superintendent Bill Peters told the newspaper, quote, "I do not like using a word like executions, but that is what we are dealing with. These are professional assassins who are paid to kill. They don't care who it is or what the reasons are, as long as they get the money. In 30 years as a policeman, I have never known anything like it. It is clear that organised violence is on the increase. Perhaps the victims knew about criminal activities and were being punished by gang bosses. Maybe they got too deeply into some criminal activity. We just don't know. We do know they did not know each other. Our appeals for these murders have fallen on deaf ears. The reason for that is fear. But I can assure anyone who has information that their identities will be kept in the strictest confidence." It was stated that 20 contract killings were thought to have been carried out over the past couple of years, in addition to the murders of Terry, Maxine, and Lee. Other victims included Brendan Carey, who was shot 5 times in the head in the Prince of Wales pub in Caledonian Road, Islington, in September 1990. Carey, who was said to have been an armed robber, was killed when 2 men wearing crash helmets came into the pub and shot him before making their escape on a motorcycle. And then there was the murder of Peter Rossini, a 47-year-old antiques dealer who was gunned down in March 1991 outside his home in North London. These murders both remain unsolved. A £30,000 reward was put up by a wealthy local-based businessman, for information relating to any of these murders, which has gone unclaimed. On Sunday, the 18th of February 1996, the Sunday Express newspaper claimed that police were examining one of London's most feared crime syndicates as being possibly responsible for the murders of Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold. The Adams family, also known as the Clerkenwell Crime Syndicate, is a prominent organised crime group based in North London, founded by three brothers, Terry, Tommy and Patrick Adams, during the 1980s. The syndicate became one of the most influential crime enterprises in the UK. It was claimed by the Sunday Express that Terry Gooderham was understood to have helped with the family's bookkeeping. An article published years later in 2007 by The Independent states that Terry is said to have crossed the brothers by stealing £250,000 worth of drugs money. More recently, the Upsetter blog published an article discussing the double murder, which states a business associate of Terry had confirmed to the author that the Adams crime family were a client, although it has been suggested by police officials that Terry may have been aware of criminal activity through his work as an accountant and within the London pub trade. It has continually been denied that he had any direct links to such activities himself. This sentiment was echoed in 2001 when retired Detective Inspector Colin Taylor appeared in a televised appeal with Maxine Arnold's mother, stating, quote, "This is one of the worst cold-blooded murders I have ever had to deal with. These were two seemingly normal, happy young people who were not connected to crime in any way. I personally think he did stumble over something in the course of his bookkeeping, and it was so important that there was a large risk of him coming to the police about it, and because of that, he was killed. What the reason was, I really don't know." In 2012, retired Chief Superintendent Albert Patrick carried out a review into the double murder of Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold. Shockingly, he claimed to have discovered that there were 3 suspects whose names were given to police in 1990, in addition to a 4th individual who is said to have driven the getaway car in which the 4 men fled the scene. In 2019, an investigation spearheaded by the Daily Mirror newspaper found that through his work in the pub trade, Terry may have had knowledge of illegal activity, specifically a scam involving gang members who hijacked lorries to supply a pub protection racket. It is theorised that Terry was about to go to the police with this information prior to his murder. Terry was the intended target, and Maxine was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was innocent of any wrongdoing and killed out of necessity to cover up the crime. The Mirror found that 4 individuals who were linked to organised crime, the same individuals unearthed in the 2012 review, had been connected to the murder within days. A key source in the Mirror investigation, an anonymous former detective turned whistleblower, said he had been given these names by an informant in January 1990. The informant, himself a gangster and robber, said Terry had been killed because he knew too much about the scam involving pubs. The informant was motivated to share this information with the police because he thought it was wrong that an innocent woman had been killed. The informant named an associate of the infamous Kray Twins as being behind the scam. The man allegedly behind Terry and Maxine's double murder had been in the Kray's gang until the brothers were given life sentences in 1969, after which he branched off into the pub trade. Based on the information he received, the whistleblower detective believed this associate to the Krays was responsible for sanctioning the execution of Terry and Maxine. This man did not kill Terry and Maxine himself. It was one of the other suspects who actually pulled the trigger. The informant himself was scared for his life, as he claimed one of the men responsible for the double murder had a connection to a corrupt police official. The whistleblower detective knew this police officer by reputation and had heard similar rumours concerning him. The whistleblower detective passed on this information through a safe channel, in the hope it would reach those investigating the double murder. Not long after this, a senior detective approached the whistleblower and told him the informant had retracted his statement. The whistleblower thought this odd, but couldn't do a lot more about it at the time. In 2019, the Mirror was able to get hold of a police report from May 1990, which corroborated the story given by the informant. At the time of the initial investigation, the murder squad never got the log with the names of the suspects on it, and thus they were not properly investigated. The whistleblower detective is now known to be Mick Randall, who continues to fight for justice on behalf of Terry and Maxine. In January 2024, he was interviewed by journalists Michael Gillard and John Austin for the Sunday Express. In the article, Mr. Randall gives further details, confirming his informant to be the now deceased Albert Redding, a notorious East End criminal with connections to the Kray Twins. The individual responsible for the scam, which Terry Gooderham supposedly had knowledge of, was named as another associate of the Kray Twins, Connie Whitehead, who is stated to be responsible for authorising the murder of Terry. Whitehead passed away in 2023 and denied any involvement in the killings up to his death. Although they are not named, the individuals who carried out the double murder of Terry and Maxine are described simply as a man who has died since, another man who is still alive and denies any involvement, and a third man who also had connections to the Adams crime family. Mick Randall continues to apply pressure on authorities to keep working the case in order to see it finally resolved, and for any corrupt former police officers to be brought to justice. According to police, the case was last reviewed in 2015, but it could not be taken any further. The Met Police anti-corruption and cold case teams continue to examine it periodically. The murder of Lee Parsons and the double murder of Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold are both marked by eerie similarities. Both crimes involved victims that were seemingly lured from their homes to be methodically executed without leaving much behind in the way of evidence, leaving investigators and the public grasping for answers. It's easy to see why these murders were initially linked by investigators and the media due to the proximity in time and location, the apparent precision of the killings, and the possibility of ties to organised crime. However, as we've explored, significant differences set these cases apart. The motivations, relationships, and circumstances surrounding the victims point towards different motives for these tragedies. One appears to be steeped in the dangerous intersections of the criminal underworld, while the other seems rooted in a personal vendetta or a chillingly calculated decision to silence someone. In reference to the double murder of Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold, it appears as if Terry was the primary target. If his murder was due to information that he had regarding criminal activity, or if he was involved directly in such activity, then a contract killing would seemingly be more likely to have come directly from the criminals Terry was associated with or aware of. In reference to the murder of Lee Parsons, it's possible the victim could have been aware of criminal activity through her escorting work. It's equally, if not more likely, possible that someone sought the help of a professional assassin to silence her for a number of other reasons. Or, perhaps, Lee's murder has no ties to organised crime whatsoever. While the truth behind these murders may remain hidden, the hope endures that one day breakthroughs in evidence or courage from those who know more will bring these cases to a close and provide some measure of peace for those left behind. If you have any information that could assist authorities in relation to the murders of Lee Parsons or Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold, please contact the UK non-emergency number on 101. The Crime Portal is a channel dedicated to exploring lesser-known murder and missing persons cases. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to all of those who suggested I cover Lee Parsons' case. For more information on the cases discussed in this video, or to make a suggestion of your own, please visit the Crime Portal website. And, as always, thank you for watching.